What's up, guys? Sergeant Argerwart here, and today we're going to be reacting to What If Germany Won World War II, Part 1. So, yes, by AlternateHistoryHub. We haven't reacted to them in a while. I reacted to What If They Won World War I, which is a pretty interesting video. But yeah, anyways, this is a series. I don't know how many parts there are, but Part 2 is right there. So, yeah. One more announcement before I start the video. Make sure to repeat your suggestions because I get a lot of suggestions and a lot of them get sort of stuck in the videos that I did a long time ago. And I have a lot of videos, so I can't necessarily remember every single suggestion. So make sure to repeat them in videos in my newer videos so that way I know to react to them. But yeah, without further ado, let's get started.
World War II transformed the destiny of mankind. Not only was it the most destructive conflict in human history, but it was the ultimate clash of ideologies and facts.
Whoa! Okay, this must have been old YouTube. Because, nowadays, no one uses the swastikas on their videos. Yeah, kind of old. Nowadays, if you look at history videos, it'll just show, the Iron Cross.
Factions which had slowly evolved for centuries. In our timeline, after years of war, the Third Reich was obliterated, Hitler committed suicide, and a violent ideology died with him. In the aftermath, the victors, the Allies, organized the entire world in a manner which would never allow such an occurrence to happen again. They were able to shape mankind's future in their image. Today we are globalized, connected both economically and socially. The internet, American influence,
Wait, why did it say economically, but it showed a picture of the soldier?
all can be tied back to the victors of that war. The reason I say this is because many don't think about the world today in any other way than the natural evolution of progress. Yet it is not. If the war's outcome had been any different, Western civilization from every aspect of life would have been radically changed. What if
Yeah.
the Allies did not defeat Nazi Germany? What if in an
By the way, this is a very unlikely scenario. Germany Germany was pretty set to lose the war from the moment they stepped into the conflict. Whether it be because of a lack of resources and competent allies, the fact that the United States and the Soviet Union were, about to get really strong, and only getting stronger, and the British Navy, all these things make it almost inevitable. The only way I see Germany staying in the fight is if they somehow successfully do fall blow and take the Caucasus oil and the food from the Ukraine and hold on to it. And even then, that's not a guarantee of them winning the war. That's just them staying in the war for a lot longer. Maybe a year longer or 2 years longer. Yeah, overall, it's unlikely that they would have won the war.
alternate timeline, the Third Reich, through military might and conquest, conquered Europe and won World War II. I'm going to explore the effects of a Nazi victory on the human and global scale. How would it transform the 20th and 21st centuries? In American schools, Nazi imagery and teachings are only mentioned in brief generalizations. We all know Nazi policies were anti-Semitic, racist, authoritarian, etc., but rarely is the ideology itself analyzed. In this alternate scenario, I'm not going to specifically focus on what Germans could have done differently to have won the war. This has been debated by numerous historians. What I want to focus on is what such a world would look like if Hitler's plans were allowed to be put into action. Here is one scenario. In this alternate timeline, Nazi Germany has launched a successful invasion of Europe. Britain, France, Poland, the Eastern Soviet Union, and numerous other countries all have been occupied by German troops. Somehow Germany invaded Britain, and facing overwhelming odds, even though Churchill promised not to, the British are forced to surrender or be basically annihilated. In this alternate timeline, the Third Reich consolidates control over the new land it is occupied across the continent, making any effective American incursion impossible. At first, resistance movements would fight against the Germans and puppet fascists like in Vichy France and the UK, but after years of strengthening control over trade and resources, the Third Reich basically starves out any opposition.
By the way, I think it's really, it's kind of annoying how the Yugoslav and, Russian resistance and the Polish resistance is overlooked by, instead of the French resistance, for example, which is literally everywhere. And don't get me wrong, what they did was really brave and cool. But, you should, the Yugoslavs single-handedly liberated almost all of Yugoslavia. It wasn't until, the Soviet Union moved in that it was sort of official. If you look at a map of the partisans in Yugoslavia, or German-occupied Yugoslavia, they had control over, the majority, of, I don't know, 70%. I would have to look at a map again, it's been a while. But they had a lot of Yugoslavia, the majority of it. It's crazy. I just think they deserve more credit. So, look that up. It's really interesting.
The Germans in our timeline and in this alternate one would massacre innocent civilians in retaliation for insurgency.
Rude!
With
That
this
is
tactic
rude.
and low resources, resistance would
Rude.
fall pretty quickly. In the Soviet Union, the war between the Russians
Come
and
on,
Germans
man.
drags into a stalemate, eventually devolving into a resistance movement as the Russians are pushed back to the Urals. How this could have occurred, I'm not going to specify, but if the Nazis' plan succeeded, then the Soviet government is pushed further into Siberia, but the bulk of the population is now under German control. Nazism cannot...
Fun fact: by 1942 or something like that, the Axis, the population of the Axis outnumbered the population of Germany and the land they occupied actually outnumbered the population of the Soviet Union. So for a brief while, they actually had more people than the Soviet Union had.
be registered on how we traditionally think on the political scale. It is an entirely new beast, one that takes elements from across the spectrum to reinvent society into something entirely new. Hitler's New Order was to be a civilization that threw away centuries of Western teachings, including the ideas of the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, and Christianity. A civilization that bases everything on the spread and domination of a specific group, the Aryan race. To understand a world...
That's kind of... Okay, I know I keep stopping. But this is a really important point that I make. Nazis never used the words... They never used the word Aryan. They never said that. Or any German equivalent of that. No. Aryan basically means they come from, is basically the Indo-Europeans of South Asia. And that's why the name of Iran is Iran. It's named after Aryan, because it's named after the people that live there. Aryan doesn't mean, these super white Northern Europeans with blonde hair and blue eyes. I don't know how that myth started, but that is a myth.
World where the Germans won World War II, we need to understand the concepts of Nazism and their horrific ideas of racial superiority and classification. If Nazi Germany won the war, they would reorganize Europe based on racial hierarchies.
Rude.
Since eugenics was popular, the Nazis based their policies off of genetics and ranked people off of positive and supposed inferior genes.
Oh my gosh, hold on.
Off of genetics and ranked people off
They've used the same image 50 times in this video so far.
of positive and supposed inferior genes. At the top was the Aryan race. Aryans to the Nazis were people of Germanic descent. This meant pure ethnic Germans had the highest status among the Nazi society. Just below true Aryans were Western Europeans.
Well, I wouldn't say Western Europeans, more like Northern Europeans. Because the Germans, they actually viewed the French people of Northern France above those of Southern France. And, they saw themselves basically Germanic people plus other Northern European peoples, like Swedish, Norwegian, British. So I would say more Northern Europeans than Western Europeans.
Such as the British, Northern French, Irish, and Dutch. The Chinese and Japanese were also at this level, as
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like,
Hitler declared them honorary Aryans.
Yeah,
Below
it's-
them were the
and fun fact, Germany is actually closely tied with China. Before, before Japan came along and signed the tripartite pact with them. But even then, they were never really that closely aligned with Japan.
Mediterranean race. Southern and Tanner Europeans such as Italians, Southern French, Spanish, and Greeks. Hitler believes Southern Europeans were naturally more lazy than the Northerners.
But why the Greeks, though? Like, the Greeks were, the Byzantine Empire and stuff. Even the Italians, they made the Roman Empire. Like, I don't know why it's so weird.
This thought of Italian inferiority to Germans caused a lot of tension between Mussolini and Hitler. I'll talk about how this will play out later. Skipping past a few levels, at the very bottom were the Untermensch. These were racial groups the Nazis considered.
Yeah, an Untermensch is literally like subhuman in German.
Too inferior or dangerous to live. These were the Slavs, such as the Poles, Russians, and Ukrainians, Jews, Roma, homosexuals, communists.
What are the Roma? Someone in the comments tell me.
Etc. In this alternate timeline, if Germany was able to successfully implement Lebensraum, after decades of German control, Poland, Russia, and the Eastern Slavs would cease to exist. The Slavic people of Eastern Europe would face a genocide 10 times larger than that of the Holocaust in our timeline. Mass extermination in the tens of millions. Hitler was a fan of how the United States successfully depopulated and pushed back the American Indians, and so he wanted to recreate this against the Slavs. In this alternate timeline, following a German victory, borders are redrawn arbitrarily and governments are set up in what was formerly Poland, Ukraine, and the Russian states, now with German leaders. Slavs begin to lose rights, resistance is met with entire towns being slaughtered, and Jews are immediately sent into concentration camps, as they were to be automatically killed. The Slavic people were to become enslaved, and used as a mass labor force to contribute to the German war machine, and farm the land if need be. But first, most of the population would need to die. Laws are passed similar to Stalin's policies, causing mass starvation, and soon millions die in a massive famine. In our timeline, Hitler's plan was for over 50 million to die before colonization could begin. Over a period of a few years, once the natives no longer exist as a nation, German colonists began moving and colonizing former Slavic lands.
How do they even do that, though? Like, how do the Germans have so many people that they can basically terraform all of that land and completely integrate it into Germany? Like, how do they have that many people where they can make that entire place German? Like, yeah, I get that they were very heavily promoting, women to give birth to like 1 million children. But still, look how much land that is. How do you do that?
Germany as a country is quadrupled in size, expanding from France to the center of Russia. The few Slavs deemed acceptable for Germanization are forced to only have children with Germans to eventually breed out the Slavic genes. The culture of these lands would be destroyed and torched. History of the people forgotten under Nazi genocide. With the massive industrial scale of the Third Reich and resistance defeated, they could easily be capable of such an atrocity. The German school systems would teach young Germans the inferiority of the Slavs, creating a new racial divide between German Aryans and enslaved Slavic people. Very similar to situations in apartheid South Africa, racial segregation and outright atrocities would occur between German colonial masters and enslaved Russians in the Ukraine colonies. Slavs would be banned from reproducing except to create new slaves. In fact, across Nazi Germany, abortion would not only be legal, but mandatory for non-Aryans. It would remain illegal for Aryan mothers, as German women would be expected to reproduce as much as possible. Mass sterilization would be enforced against parents who gave birth to unhealthy children, or kids born with Down syndrome or developmental illnesses. German colonists would farm the fertile lands of the Ukraine, and use the vast breadbasket to feed a growing German population. If successful, Nazi Germany would redefine the demographics of Europe, and in a few decades, most of the population in Eastern Europe would be of German descent.
I wouldn't say a few decades. What? That seems way too fast. A few decades? What?
The New Order meant a complete reinvention of what it meant to be European and a member of Western civilization. Nazi Germany would be the leading dominant nation of Europe and be the puppet master to the countless fascist governments of the UK, France, Italy, and Spain. Even though propaganda would boast an equal union of European nations, in reality, some nations, even fascist ones, would be lower than others. Hitler's racial criteria would determine Nazi relationships, and so German policies would favor more Aryan nations like France and Britain over Mediterranean countries like Spain and Italy. In this alternate timeline, with the war over, the Nazis would immediately rebuild Britain, and fascist Britain would become the right-hand man to the Reich. As for the Italians, even in our
Yeah, like, in real life, Germany really didn't care about Britain. Like, Germany's main goal was to take over, the East. Take over Russia and Eastern Europe. So that way, they can get the resources they needed, and a Lebensraum. They didn't really care that much about killing Britain because one, they didn't have as many resources, at least like in mainland Britain, and two, because of the fact that they saw them as sort of their friends, since they were Northern Europeans as well. In real life, they actually proposed peace with them, and for a while they were, like, there was like a lot of movements in Britain for peace with Germany, but that was until, they started bombing each other.
our timeline, Mussolini knew the disdain Hitler had for Southern Europeans, and it greatly affected the relationship between the two. Mussolini's call for a unity between the Nordic and Mediterranean races fell on deaf ears for the Nazis. In this alternate timeline, I predict Hitler simply would have tolerated Southern Europe for the sake of stability, while playing favorites with the Nordic French and British. This split would grow even larger in the following decades, becoming a culture clash between the two regions. In our timeline, the Holocaust was only supposed to be the first phase of the New Order, immediate genocide of undesirables within German borders. However, these were not the only groups the Nazis wished to silence. Nazism at its core was
there's the picture again.
idea of a race united under the full allegiance to the state and only the state. Citizens were to contribute militarily and technologically to advance the German race. To Hitler and the Third Reich, any idea that took focus away from the state was an enemy. Removing the Jewish question was the first phase of the New Order. The Slavs were next, and after that, Catholicism itself, or the church question. Hitler was born a Catholic, but grew to hate the church as he became an adult. His views fell perfectly in line with the Nazi ideology. Nazism viewed Catholicism as not only an obstacle, but a threat to the progress of the German state. They despised the idea of a non-governmental force having influence over Europeans and Aryans. Before the war, Nazis closed Catholic institutions, barred Catholic messages, and arrested many members of the clergy. However, in part with his alliance with Italy and to stop instability, Hitler made a treaty with the Vatican to respect Catholic institutions. Yet to the Nazis, Catholics remained a prominent threat. In this alternate timeline, after the war, the Nazis would immediately break the agreement with the Vatican. Across Germany and its occupied territories, Catholic institutions would be closed and its clergymen arrested. In Hitler's eyes, religion itself was fundamentally incompatible and dangerous to the progress of Europe. He even called those who were religious slaves. At the time, the Nazis had to put up a face of being Protestant Christians, but secretly, the highest ranks, like Joseph Goebbels, despised religion and Catholicism, yet they decided to postpone any action until after the war. They believed it was a foreign invention which promoted Jewry and made Europeans weak-minded and too merciful. Heinrich Himmler even wrote, "We live in an era of the ultimate conflict with Christianity. It is a part of the mission of the SS to give the German people in the next half-century the non-Christian ideological foundations on which to lead and shape their lives. This task does not consist solely in overcoming an ideological opponent, but must be accompanied at every step by a positive impetus." In this case, that means the reconstruction of the German heritage in the widest and most comprehensive sense. In this alternate timeline, the Third Reich would have used everything to slowly strangle Christianity in its borders. Propaganda to paint Catholics at first as enemies of Aryans and Germans, and even secret violence against Catholic leaders, the same tactics which divided Europeans just as they did between Slavs and Germans. Over the decades, Catholicism would be stripped from Nazi Germany. Most of the Catholic Poles would have been killed in the hunger policies. In German Catholic regions, simple Nazi propaganda would be used to snuff out the church. Laws banning Catholic education and press would...
Jeez, how do you even do that, though? Like, Catholicism is pretty big. Like, how are you supposed to do that? Especially when, Catholicism will still exist in places like Italy and Spain, where they're independent countries that are Catholic. Like, that seems really difficult to do that. Like, and there's millions of them. I don't know, that seems like it would be very difficult.
Would be enacted. After the Catholic Church, the Third Reich would actively discourage Christianity itself, and if decades of propaganda would work, they could create a generation of loyal, non-Christian Germans. Nazis would teach that the religion was a destructive, brainwashing Jewish force which weakened native Europeans. Some Nazis even wished to replace Christianity with neo-paganism. But in this timeline, religion would be replaced with loyalty to the Nazi regime and to the race. The swastika would replace the cross across much of German Europe. This scenario is going to be a part of a new series. I don't know how many parts it will be, but I want to focus in detail on every aspect of life in this alternate scenario. I don't want to rush it. World War II was a defining moment that decided the history of Western civilization. In the Allied victory, Nazism was destroyed and never returned to power. But had the victory gone to Germany, the modern world would have evolved and taken a much darker turn. Over the next few videos, I'll explore in length one out of the infinite possible scenarios if Hitler had won the war. Like on Facebook and subscribe if you have not done so. This is Cody from the Alternate History Hub.
Wow, thank you all for watching, everyone. Yeah, tomorrow I should be reacting to part 2 of What If Germany Won World War II. Yeah, thank you everyone for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe to my channel, and turn on the notification bell thingy. And if you didn't, then make sure to leave a thumbs down. But yeah, that would be greatly appreciated. And while you're at it, go ahead and watch my other videos. They're probably just as good, and if not better than this one right now. Except for my oldest videos, don't watch those. And, subscribe to these people down here, my fellow sergeants. They're other YouTubers that I either know or I have in high regards. Yeah, even my cat agrees. So, thank you for watching, and have a great day.